there are three places where people go to. First place they go to is their home. The second place they go to is work. Then there was a third place where people went to. And that third place was where people found their identity, their place of belonging, their relationship development, right? Their friendships, all that kind of stuff. And what happened was when people lived in the city, you found that within a 2-block radius. But when you moved out into the suburbs, you lost that, and people lost their third place.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Crave Struggle podcast. Today I have a super special guest. I have with me Mike Alvarez. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well, man. I'm glad to be here with you. This is awesome. I love it.
Mike, I wanted to ask you right off the bat, with Millennial Giving being down and as more and more millennials are not joining the church, where do you see the church going? Do you see pastors having to get a part-time job or even a full-time job and then balance writing messages at nights or on the weekends? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I think we've seen something with the pandemic that obviously has taken a hit on everything from like companies and businesses to the church. It's really funny as we are kind of coming back now to back to normal life with everything, with the rules changing, with mask wearing and all that kind of stuff. Everybody's kind of returning back to normal. The only thing that's not coming back to normal is the attendance wise at church. Right now, I think churches are seeing by and large about anywhere between, I think, 40 to 60% of the people coming back in person. And it's been really rough. A lot of churches have taken a financial hit. And so, but the one thing that's really interesting is that while the church has taken a hit from the pandemic financially, before the pandemic hit, because of millennials and Gen Zers, they actually stopped giving prior to the pandemic. So what's interesting about that is that a lot of millennials and a lot of Gen Zers see that they love to give of their time, their talent, but not their treasure. And so somehow about that, they kind of keep their finances to themselves, but they're willing to donate their time, they're willing to donate their talent, but they're not willing to donate their treasure. And so somewhere around how we kind of deal with that is that somehow you have to associate giving with story. And if you can somehow connect young people to like getting them involved in some kind of a missional way of life, where they see that their time and their talent is being invested, and you tie that into a greater story, most of them will start to give financially. I think one of the things that churches are struggling with is learning how to tie those things together with young people. And so I think that I think most churches, and I don't really know the percentage of this, I think most churches think that, if we just do what we've been doing with Gen Xers and boomers and all that, then, if we kind of treat the millennial and the Gen Zer that way, and then the generation coming after that, which is the alphas, if we treat them like Gen Xers and boomers, we have them. And the reality is that that's not true. Think of yourself, think of what connects you to your church, think of what causes you to give. And so I think, if there's something about that your finances is tied in with a greater story or a greater mission, which is a great story, people will give to that. Young people will give to that. And so I think we're seeing the tension of that right now in churches.
Why do you think it is then? Have you talked to any Gen Zers or millennials and gotten really specific with them? Like, why are they not giving?
I think because they don't see the value in it, and it's really odd to say that, because there is value in the church and there is value in the mission of the church, but somehow I think that young people that have grown up in church are somehow bored with church. and they're bored with coming to church. I like to say this. I believe that young people are very interested in God. They're just not interested in the church.
Mm.
And I think that church somehow is not speaking their language. They're answering questions that young people are not asking. Um, I think the church is somehow trying to solve a problem that young people don't really see as an issue. And so in many ways, I don't think the church is really speaking to them where they are. They're not talking about the topics that young people are dealing with. They're not wrestling with those tension points. So if young people aren't experiencing and hearing those things speaking into their life and into their routine and into the things that, I should say, into the walls that they're running into in life and daily living, then it's hard for them to um, put their money in something that they think is of no value to them. So, what I'm hearing is, we deal with a lot of young people in my context where I'm at right now. And, young people will show up to our gatherings. The one thing that we're struggling with right now, the tensions I'm experiencing, is having them show up on a Sunday morning. That's their thing. They don't mind showing up to a Thursday night to our gatherings. They're struggling showing up to a Sunday morning. They just see no value in it. And so some of them do give, some of them don't give. And so that's a big tension point. And so my job is to help them understand the role of the church and what the church is in their life, and try to raise the awareness of that, and create a bigger mission. Here's the thing. I think that sometimes, church leaders today think like, oh, well, young people don't have money. And they, their parents are the ones that have money. Young people don't have money. That's not true. Young people do have money. I mean, that's why they're gaming, that's why they have all these subscriptions to stuff. They'll show up to a Marvel movie. They'll show up to a DC movie. I mean, they have money. The thing is that you're just not tapping in to that area of their life that they want to invest into. They are willing to invest in something. We have so many young people that are entrepreneurs, and they are starting side hustles and doing things and all that. They have money. So that's not the issue. And so if we make that, if we kind of give that excuse to them, then what's going to happen is, I think the church is doing an injustice to itself. And I think that if we allow that to happen, what we're doing is we're conditioning young people to believe that it's okay not to give. It's okay not to participate in that area that Scripture really commands us to do. So I think that's the big issue in many ways.
That's fascinating, because I think about all the millennials in my church, and I was even thinking about my giving actually super recently, where I had wrote out my expenses, and I went top to bottom of the biggest number to smallest number. And what was my smallest number? It was tithing. That was my smallest number. And I was like, well, not that it has to be a certain number. Obviously, giving 10% is good, but it also is a lot more of conviction as well. And I was like, okay, why am I giving to this church? Like, for me, like, I love my church. Like, we have such a good sense of community there. I wonder, it really has to go to, maybe there's just a lack of understanding of the scripture verses that are talking about giving and why you need to give it. And it's not that there's a certain dollar amount, but it's more of coming from the heart and understanding that in order for the church to keep going, at some point it does still need finances to be able to fund it. I'm curious, with you being at your age, how have you been able to still connect with the younger generation? What are ways that you've connected with them? Because you have a very interesting tactic in the way you ask questions, and I think that's probably one of the ways that you connect with them so fast, is the way you did it with me. But what are ways that you've found to still stay in the conversation with teenagers and people in their 20s?
Yeah. For me, I think one, I get asked, I do get asked this question, often enough. And I like to tell people that I learned years ago, um, and I'm not sure what triggered this or what helped me realize this. And but this kind of changed the trajectory of kind of how I connect with people. But I learned years ago um, to stop being interesting to people. I think that when, especially in people that are in ministry that are reaching the next generation, whether you're a junior high pastor or a high school, especially a high school pastor or a college pastor, you work very hard at just trying to be cool or engaging or relevant in some way. So you're wearing the skinny jeans and you're doing all this stuff and you're speaking the language and you're listening to the music and all that kind of stuff. And for me, like I love music, but I don't know all the what's cool right now in music. I don't have really great taste in fashion. The only cool thing that I have is probably my glasses, and that's about it. Um, and so, but the one thing I learned was that I needed to stop being interesting to people. When you do that, when you focus on being interesting to people, the problem is that while you are interesting to a particular audience of people, you are segregating a totally different audience, because now what you're doing is now you're only pulling in the people that you connect with, and those are really the only people that you're going to engage with. So I stopped trying to be interesting to people. What I focused on is being more interested in people. And so I shifted my goal in making it about me and trying to make it more about people. And I focused in on just trying to connect with people and really engaging people in question asking. I get told pretty often that, I mean, you mentioned this a moment ago, that I ask a lot of questions, and I do ask a lot of questions. I am a question asker. I love asking questions. I am I've what I like to call is I've developed an appetite for curiosity, and I'm fascinated with people, and I'm fascinated with why they do what they do, and why they're engaged in the things they're engaged in. And I just got to a point where I just want to be interested in people. And so I just started asking a lot of questions because I wanted to learn, I wanted to grow, I wanted to understand people. So I see people more like a library. And so I tend to kind of I'm not sure how to word this, like check them out like a book. And when I engage people, to me, I feel like and this will sound silly, but I feel like I'm reading a chapter out of their life. And so I'm just taking little snippets from their life and learning from them, and understanding that. And I think in some ways that's what keeps me connected to people. And so when I hear tension points in their life, I tend to take my life experiences and turn them into life lessons. And so I just kind of speak into the tension of where they are. And I think that's given me the ability to stay engaged with people and connect with people. And so I've just done through the years, I've just worked really hard on asking um, like better questions. I think there's a difference between asking a good question and asking a better one.
Yeah.
So I think like sometimes a good question is, what do you do for a living? That's a good question. A better question is, why do you do that for a living? And so, because now you have a story. And so I've tried to learn to ask better questions, because to me it gets into the heart of where people are, and I just love listening to stories. So I think that that's what keeps me engaged with young people. I mean, the feedback I get from young adults is like, man, you ask a lot of good questions, and you just seem so interested in my life, and I genuinely am. I've worked really hard too, Luke, where I've tried not to have like pastor's eyes. I don't know if you know what I mean when I say that.
No.
Yeah, pastors. As a kid growing up, when I was in church and I would want to go talk to my pastor, uh, the at the end of a service, generally everybody's in line wanting to talk to the pastor, and so when you're talking to the pastor's kind of looking past you, looking to see how long the line is, and so somehow he at times he never felt you never felt that he was engaged in what you were saying. And so he always just kind of looked over you. He would look at you and then kind of look past you to see how long the line was. And so what I never was to have pastor's eyes. I never wanted to look at somebody and then look past them to see who I'd rather talk to. And so for me, it's about engaging the person, connecting with that person. I think one of the things we see in our culture today is that young people, whether it's millennials or whether it's Gen Zers or whether it's alphas, is that while we are very engaged socially on social media platforms, we have not learned the art of doing this, of engaging in conversation, of developing that connection point. It's funny. The whole conversation right now is about the metaverse and about how all this is going to shift, and where the church, where is the church going to go with the metaverse, and as if you're starting side businesses and side hustles, and should I buy an NFT, and should I create NFTs, and I mean all these conversations that go along with that. The one thing that I've been having conversations with is that, as the world slowly moves into the metaverse, and we're trying to figure out where the world sits on that platform. The one thing I've said to people is that I think there are great things about the metaverse and all that's going to be happening there. I think one of the big detriments about the metaverse that we're going to experience is that while more and more people are going to be moving into that world, I think the disengagement will be on people's skills development. And so people are going to be so engaged in creating this artificial world that I think the number one commodity on this is again my opinion. Number one commodity is young people having people skills, this engagement, this one-on-one conversation of just meeting in person and interacting with people. And so I think that's kind of a lost art, or it's becoming an art that we're losing that. And so I think for me, I think that's one of the ways I've stayed connected with people. I think the other thing too, Luke, is that people, I'm 45 years old. I think the average young adult pastor right now is about maybe their early 30s. And so here's an interesting stat. They say that if you're a pastor, if you're in ministry, they say the most effective range of ministry that you'll find yourself in is a 10-year radius of your age. So let's say you're 30 years old. At some point, you're going to be effective to a 20-year-old and to a 40-year-old. That's within the 10-year range. And so generally, once you reach that point, you've kind of opted out of as you get older, you kind of opt out of being effective in reaching the next generation because you kind of aged out. And so for me, I'm this guy who's 45 years old ministering to, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And so people ask me like, how is it that you stay engaged with them? And again, I'm not really into the music and doing all this stuff. So it's like, how do you stay connected? So the other thing that I've kind of learned for myself too is that I used to think years ago that I needed to have all the answers to people's questions, to people's situations, to the tensions of their life. And when I realized when people would come to me and ask me questions about how to deal with certain things in life, I would, if I didn't know, I would just make up stuff because I feel like I needed to know or I needed to give them an answer. And so I learned a long time ago that I needed to stop having all the answers, but I just needed to start having all the great questions. And so if I can move away by trying to not be the guy that gives you all the answers, but if I'm the guy that really asks the engaging questions, sometimes a great question can shift and change the trajectory of a situation. And so that's kind of where I have found myself in.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. You're much more interested in the person, and let's be honest, most people love to talk about themselves for the most part. So if you can get them to just if you can take interest in it, and people can tell when you're interested. You're making eye contact. You're not looking away, just like you were saying. It completely changes everything. You shake their hand, you embrace them, whatever the relationship is, and you come alongside them. You follow up with them. You send them a text, "Hey brother, how you doing?" Like that type of fellowship, we were meant for that. That's incredible. So you've put in your 10,000 hours, no problem of mastering that craft.
Yeah, and for me, like it wasn't something where it's like I need to learn the art of people skills, or I need to learn the art of asking good questions. It was more for me of trial and error. It was just me stumbling over being ineffective as a communicator or being ineffective as a person who's engaging somebody. And so I have really high EQ, and so my IQ is like really low. My EQ is really high, and so
Just real quick, what is explain the difference between the two just for those listening.
IQ kind of measures your intelligence, your like your ability to like your academic ability and all that kind of stuff. Your EQ is your emotional quality. And so to give you an example of this, if you were to walk into a room and sometimes when you walk in a room you just feel like wow, I just everyone just feels very happy in this room, or if you walk in the room like man, something feels very awkward in here and not sure what that is, you can't put your finger on it. That's your EQ, like you're feeling something in the room, and that's not nothing like weird. It's not, I'm not talking about energy or anything like that. I'm just talking about like you can feel the emotional temperature of a room, and that's your EQ kind of kicking in. Some people will say I make decisions from my gut, like I'm a gut decision maker. That's really your EQ kicking in. I have really high EQ. Like there are some areas where I kind of measure off the charts when it comes to that kind of thing. So the problem with my level of EQ is that I also pay attention to body language and I read body language. And so as a stage, standing on a platform communicating, you obviously have your material and things you're going to be communicating, but at the same time, I'm also paying attention to body language. And so if I see somebody kind of dozing off, or I see somebody, they seem disengaged, I'm very quickly trying to pull people back in. And so anyway, I don't even know where I was going with my EQ comment, um, but that's something that I have that I have I'm really high in that area, and so it causes me to want to feel my way through conversations and feel my way through people's lives and really want to understand. I'm big on wanting to understand a situation, which is the reason why I ask a lot of questions, a lot of clarifying questions. And so, but something that fascinates me, and I've always been fascinated by you in this area. I met you when you were I think you were, I don't know if you were like 14, 15 years old, something like that.
Yeah,
Because how old are you now?
I'm 20. Yeah.
20 years old. Okay. So I met you about 6 years ago, give or take. And the fact that you have like facial hair now, because when I met you, like you were like 14 or 15 years old, but you looked a lot younger than that.
Yeah.
So which good. You had this great baby face and all that stuff. But when I met you at the church, the other church you were attending during that time, and you were this kid that had like a bow tie, and you're just like this man and this young boy. And so, but I was so fascinated by you because you were this young kid who was very engaging in conversation, and you were just older beyond your years. And so I'm always intrigued with whenever I come across a young person that is more mature than their age. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, where does that come from? Part of it comes from your parents, but part of it comes from the fact that you want to be that way. And so I'm curious by you, uh, if you can remember back then, like what triggered that part of you to be that way? Like what made you start thinking more mature with maturity and all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think yeah, definitely came from my parents. So they always they taught me pretty good manners. Uh, Something that they really instilled in me was knowing when to speak, and that was trial and error. So at that age, I was very much more like I just wanted to talk all the time. Wanted to talk. I would ask good questions, but I wanted to talk because I was so passionate about that. And the more I learned that, I became self-aware of like, oh, I'm talking a ton and no one else is talking, and I'm more curious about them and what they have to say. I think of it like kind of building your network a little bit. People always say like, the five closest people to you, that's kind of who you are. But I think of my network like my net worth. I'm sure you've heard that term before, but it's like I think about that, and I think about this is a really really small world. It's crazy. I'll be having a conversation with someone and 45 minutes in they'll name drop someone. And I'm like, wait, how do you know that person? Oh, I know him from this, I know him from that. And so I'm always very aware of, I don't know if it's selfish or not, but I'm always just very aware of the people I'm talking to could know someone else. And so I want to be able to have a helpful conversation. I'm looking for different ways of how can I help that person. And a lot of it is some ways I can just offer advice. Some ways it's just listening. Most of the time it's listening. I've talked to so many couples, and whenever I'm talking to the guy, I'm like, hey, how do you deal with conflict? Whenever your wife is, talking, or, what do you do in that moment? And he's like, most of the time, I was talking to one guy in particular, he's like, most of the time, she doesn't want a solution. She just wants to be heard. And he's like, I've literally in conversation, asked her that, like, okay, babe, my natural inclination is to go right to a solution, but you just want me to listen, right? And she'd be like, yeah, like almost 95% of the time, that's what it is. And so I realized that by asking just good questions and just listening, they'll tell you the problems. Most of the time, it depends on the person. So I found just by asking better questions, and it's trial and error. I have asked some dumb questions. I have spoke about things I know nothing about just because I got myself into a hole, coming across as like, oh, I'm an expert on something when I'm not. So yeah, I don't know if I can pinpoint it. That would be a good thing to sit down and kind of write out what I could pinpoint it as. But I've always just been very curious on learning about others, who they are, and understanding their skills, what they're passionate about. Almost because I almost want to like work on a project with them. That's what it was very early on. I always looked for like people who were in videography or people who had interest in topics that I had, so I could talk to them about it and understand what they understood. Because I feel like that's one of the greatest ways to level up your skills other than reading a book. But yeah, that's a great question. For you, as you were kind of like learning all of that, was there any particular questions that you always kind of started with? Like if there's someone like you've never met this person before or whatever else, like in the conversation where there always like default questions that are always prompt some sort of good conversation?
Yeah. Um, so when I first would start meeting with people, my biggest mistake was that I would get too deep too quickly. And so sometimes like whenever I would do that, and when I say I would get deep too quickly, I mean like I was learning about their childhood trauma, like in the very first conversation. And for some odd reason, people would open up to me, and people have said to me, Mike, you just have this. I don't know what it is. I mean, people still say this day. Some guy said it to me a couple of days ago. They're like, Mike, you just have this way about yourself that people just want to tell you stuff. They want to tell you stuff about their life, and I'm not sure what that is. I mean, we could kind of flirt with that idea, but people would tell me stuff, and so I've gotten used to kind of getting into people's world. The problem is that was the first conversation. The next time I would meet them, it was just like I had pulled everything out of them in the very first conversation. There was nothing to talk about in the second conversation, other than to rehash what we had talked about in the first conversation. So it just became like very awkward. And so what I needed to do was pace myself, and so because I have really high EQ, and I think I have really good discernment too. And there's this thing I describe whenever I'm talking to somebody. I will I refer to this thing as the rattle in people. And so, have you ever, maybe you've been around a lot of little kids, and they have their toys, there, and so you see a toy and you pick it up, and it looks fully intact, and then you pick it up, and and as you pick it up, you hear this broken piece inside, and it's just kind of rattling on the inside, but everything looks intact on the outside, but there's something broken on the inside. This is sometimes what I hear in people. When I'm having a conversation with people, I'm kind of as I'm engaging them in conversation, I sometimes will hear that rattle in people, and so my first instinct is to want to kind of investigate that. People are talking and all that to me, and all of a sudden I'll hear what that tension point is in their life, and my natural tendency is to say, oh, let's deal with that, let's talk about that. And I've learned to kind of pace myself. I'm like, you know what, God, I'm gonna, in my head, when I hear that, I start praying in my head, and I would say, God, when do you want me to address this? And at what point do I talk about it? Is this now? It's a good topic later on. So it's really kind of pacing myself in that, and just engaging in people, and kind of asking questions that I think keep us connected, and keep us at a place where you're learning about me, I'm learning about you, and I think that that's sometimes the most engaging conversations with people, and I've really enjoyed those. But I have to pace myself, because if not, because people fascinate me. I mean, honestly, Luke, people fascinate me, and it's very easy for me to dive into people's personal life.
That's wild that you say that, because like that has happened a couple of times to me as well, where I'm like, oh shoot, like we went really deep in it, and maybe it's almost like sometimes when you ask a question and you're having a conversation, and then there's almost a bit of a silence. By just waiting, they almost feel that awkwardness and share something else, maybe out of just wanting to get rid of that awkwardness, or they're like, oh, he's like really engaged, like he's not trying to fill the silence. Like it's almost like subconsciously they share something else that they never would have shared before, something else, because we're constantly, like every single minute, we're on our phones or we're doing this or that. We're filling every single minute, and we're not allowing, for the vast majority of us, we're not allowing our brain to rest. Because if we do let our brain rest, we feel all this anxiety, we feel all this, whatever it is, depression. And so then we instantly go back to our phones or whatever device to distract from it. And when you finally release it and you have a good conversation, it's like almost all that starts to pour out of you.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, and again, I think that that's where you kind of you have to learn the art of pacing yourself in connection with people, in when you're engaging people. I think it's okay to, and it's appropriate that when you sense a lull in the conversation, that it's okay to say, hey, I think this is a good time to stop, or I think this is a good time to like say bye to each other. Maybe not in those words, but in your head, you're just like, hey, I think this is good. We can pick this up again the next time we get together, the next time we meet. And I think that is okay. Instead of trying to exhaust the conversation, exhaust the person, I think that's good. Honestly, I think some of the best, you asked me this question a little bit ago. You said, what's kind of my go-to question when I meet up with people. I don't know if I have a go-to question, other than sometimes, depending on what demographic of people I'm talking to, what generation of people I'm talking to. If it's a young adult, I usually am asking the question like, hey, are you in school right now? What school do you go to? What's your major, right? Why did you choose that major, right? Do you come from a background where your parents were, got a degree in this, right? Like I'm asking questions like that it's helping me learn about them, but also it's making that person feel like, oh, wow, this person's really interested in my story, in my journey. And so, if somebody says, if somebody's telling me like, oh, I'm a psychology major, I'm like, oh, really? What I know about psychology, people that enter in psychology is that, or therapy, like counseling, is that at some point, most people that enter into that world have had a traumatic experience in their life. And so they found great help in that. Somebody or something, helped them through that crisis, that they thought, oh, wow, if somebody helped me in this, I want to help more people in this. So part of me is asking that question, like, oh, you're entering this world, you must have had a traumatic experience, but and I say that kind of in a joking way, not like, oh, you must have had a traumatic experience. Tell me about that, right?
Right.
Where it's weird and creepy. But so for me, it's kind of reading. I'm constantly reading a conversation, reading the situation, because I'm going somewhere. I'm kind of guiding the conversation, and for me, like I've never really thought about it all that much, but to me, I know I'm guiding the conversation somewhere where the ultimate goal in a conversation for me is that I'm looking for what connects us in some way, because whatever connects us is where we're going to land and sit for a little bit. And so I'm asking the question, trying to figure out where we have our connection. And that's me just asking questions, guiding the conversation, figuring it out. And then ultimately we land on, oh, you went to that high school? So did I. Like, that's amazing. Who was your teacher? Right. And so we kind of, get to that place. Oh, you grew up in that church? Oh, that's amazing. I visited that church. I spoke at that church once. And it's finding that connection point. And so, but I'm constantly engaging to the point where how do we get a chance to know each other, and we find that common ground. That's what I'm after in conversation.
Do you think the solution then to keeping the Gen Z or millennials that currently are in your church and growing that and expanding that is by being intentional just in conversation? Do you think that's one of the core things?
I think that is one of the things. I think that young people are looking, number one, to belong, and they're looking for purpose, and they're looking for the identity. One of the big in some of the big research that's going on with young people is that these are one of the three areas, or one of the top three areas that young people are trying to find engagement, their purpose, their identity, and their belonging. They want to feel like they're a part of something. There's a guy by the name of Dr. Ray Oldenburg, who was the professor emeritus in Florida State University. He wrote a book called The Great Good Place. If you find a copy of it, read it. It's a hard read. It's actually kind of a very difficult academic book to read, but and I don't even know if they're still in print anymore. But if you can find one, you get an extra jewel on your crown in heaven. But it's a great book. But one of the things that Ray Oldenburg, he coined the phrase the third place. If you're familiar with the third place at all, Starbucks uses this philosophy, and so that it's implemented into almost every environment of what they do. But years ago, Ray Oldenburg did a study on cities and suburbs. And in this study, he discovered that before suburbs were ever created, people all lived in cities. You either lived in a city or you lived in rural areas like farms, kind of like where you live out in, was it Waterford or what? I always forget that.
You always botch the name. I don't know if you've ever gotten it right. It's Waterman.
Water,
Waterman. It's Waterman.
Waterman.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
it is. Waterman.
No,
Yeah,
I love it.
way
I love
out there, out in the middle of nowhere.
it. Yeah.
And so when people lived out in the cities, what Dr. Oldenburg discovered was that everything that you ever needed in life was found within the 2-block radius of where you lived. If you needed a haircut, you need to go grocery shopping, you need to go to the meat market, you need to go to the cleaners, you need to go to church. Whatever it is that you needed was found within the 2-block radius of where you lived in the city. When people started moving out of the city, and they started moving into these brand new places called suburbs, what they discovered was that whatever you needed in life was found within the 5-mile radius. So if you need a haircut, you need to go to church, you need to go grocery shopping, you need to go to the cleaners, it was found within the 5-mile radius, which made it very difficult to build relationships. What they also discovered was that when people would come home from work, they would drive their car home, open up the garage door, park their car in the garage. They would shut the garage door, and you would not talk or see your neighbors for the most part. And people didn't get a chance to know their neighbors. And what happened was Oldenburg discovered that there are 3 places where people go to. First place they go to is their home. The second place they go to is work. Then there was a third place where people went to. And that third place was where people found their identity, their place of belonging, their relationship development, right? Their friendships, all that kind of stuff. And what happened was when people lived in the city, you found that within a 2-block radius. But when you moved out into the suburbs, you lost that, and people lost their third place. And so what we've realized, and Ray Oldenburg has talked about this, is that people have been searching for their third place for the last few decades. People are looking for that place of belonging. People are looking for that connection point. People are looking for friendship. People are looking for relationship development. And so we struggle with that. We've been struggling with that for decades now, a few decades. The problem is, and kind of bringing this full circle, the problem is that as we're moving more and more into social media and more living life online, we are losing more and more that connection point. I mean, you walk into your Walmart. I mean, the Walmart that I live down the street from, they're doing all this renovation on the inside. They're converting more of their cash registers where there's self checkout lines. So now more than half of the checkout lines are self checkouts, which means that you're no longer engaging people anymore in conversation. You're no longer connecting with people. You go into some of the McDonald's that are local here. You can go up to a flat screen TV and order your meal from that, or you can order your meal from your phone, and you're not talking to people anymore. Now the pandemic has pushed that, but I mean that's kind of the world that we live in today. So it's been a big shift in that way too.
So more human contact. That's what we need. We're getting further and further away because all these businesses are looking to automate things because it means it's going to cost less in the future as they make this investment. Over time, it'll pay off, and it's getting less and less away from that. It's interesting. I don't know if you ever heard of Naval. He's a Silicon Valley investor and has done a bunch of really cool things. He has a podcast, and he said if everyone became an engineer within 5 years, everything would be automated. And what we would do is we would do all the creative jobs. So we would have all the robots do the mundane tasks, and we would just do all creative jobs.
Wow.
It's fascinating. I don't know if that would. I mean, I hope there would be collaboration in that. But as we get more and more away from human connection, I think that's why we have social anxiety, or why because we're depriving ourselves of that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's fascinating. Hopefully, this doesn't offend anybody, but who's watching this. But there's a great interview by Joe Rogan who interviews, and I forget the guy's name. He was running for president during the last election,
Bernie?
and I think his last name was what's that?
Oh, was it Bernie Sanders or
No. It was
which election?
his last name was Yang. I think it was
Oh, Andrew Yang. Yeah.
Andrew Yang. Yep. And so there's a great interview that Rogan does with Andrew Yang in this, and he gives a lot of interesting insight as to where culture is shifting and how things are going to become more and more automated. Everything from semi truck drivers to, I mean, checkout lines and all that kind of stuff. He talks about, he says it kind of in a very sarcastic way, like the robots are going to take over, like Terminator type thing. But I mean, when you hear the interview, there's a lot of things that you hear him say that's like, oh, you know what, this isn't as weird as kind of the initial thought would be about robots are taking over. Everything. You walk into an Amazon warehouse. I've worked for Amazon. You walk into an Amazon warehouse and you see a lot of things that are becoming automated. I mean, I was at Walmart the other day, and as I'm walking down the aisle, I think it had just been a big snowfall. People are bringing in all this snow and the floors are wet. There's this automatic, I don't even know what you call it, like a machine that is cleaning the floors by itself. Like there's nobody on it. It's just driving by itself, and it's like mopping the floors. And I'm just like, I'm fascinated by this because as it sees people, it stops, or it just goes around, someone on that's there with a grocery cart. Like it has a camera in all different directions. And I'm thinking to myself, that's somebody's job right there. But you see how everything is moving towards an automatic way of doing life. So things are taking a big shift that way.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on, dude. I love your perspective on young adults and being more interactive with them and identifying those pieces, and then you playing your part in the church that you're a part of and the conversations that you have and spreading that. I'd almost be curious to have like a master class. I'd love for you to like actually write out like how does someone do that? Some sort of plan, or even a series of videos, because I think that's very, very fascinating. It's fascinating to me. I love conversing with people, and I'm always trying to figure out how can I do it better? How can I ask better questions? If people wanted to find more about you and what you do, where should we send them?
You can just find me on Instagram at Mike underscore Alvarez, Alvarez. Or you can go to the ministry that I lead at Vox, VOX, V as in Victor, VOX online. And that's the ministry that I lead here at Calvary Church in Naperville. We're right outside of Chicago. And if you're ever looking for a place to hang out, you can come to Calvary Church here in Naperville, and love to meet you. Love to connect with you, give you a high five. And, but yeah, that's where you'll find me.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
You bet, man. You bet. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Luke.
What's happening, people? Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, then press here for a selection of the best clips from the podcast over the last few weeks. And consider subscribing. Peace.